Okay, good morning, everyone. Let's dive in. You are going to be submitting your penultimate assignment by tonight for the undergrads, assignment 9, for the grads, the 4th differentiable assignment. And I will post later today the 10th and final assignment for the undergrads and the 5th and final differentiable assignment for the grad students, which will be due as usual next Tuesday night. And next Tuesday we will talk about the final project, which you will attack starting at that time. Sound good? Okay, almost there. Any questions about the assignments? Going once, going twice. Okay. All right, so we are going to conclude our discussion today of the reality gap problem, and we've looked at 3 representative examples of attempts to try and cross the gap. We looked at the Golem project, create a 3D printer and use that 3D printer to print as many evolved simulated designs as possible to hope that, fingers crossed, some of them cross the gap. We finished our discussion of the Resilient Machines project last time, which is an attempt to evolve simulators to be closer and closer and closer to reality, to narrow the gap. And then today, we are going to conclude our discussion of the Transferability project. The intuition here is evolve controllers in simulation to produce the behavior you want and to be transferable, that are crossable from simulation to reality. We'll finish our discussion of transferability and then tackle the last open problem in the field, which is scalability. So there are millions of instances of ChatGPT and Claude running now on the planet. Where are the millions of computers that are shoveling our driveway and raking our leaves and mucking out our eaves and so on and so forth? How do we scale up useful and autonomous and safe machines? Okay, before we get to that topic, back to transferability. Just to remind you, we're thinking about this idea of how do we go about estimating or computing the transferability of a controller. So first of all, how do you define transferability? We'll come back to that in a moment. We looked at a new evolutionary algorithm or type of evolutionary algorithm that we haven't seen before in this class, which is MOO, multi-objective optimization. We've got 2 objectives that we want to maximize, which is the behavior we want and transferability. And we motivated our discussion about, I'm sorry about the audio-visual today. I guess we're going to blink in and out here. We came up with this visualization to represent or build up our intuition for how multi-objective optimization works. Basic idea is we're going to compute dominated and non-dominated solutions. So dominated solutions or dominated controllers is a controller that is dominated by some other controller in the population. There is something else in the population that is better than you at all the objectives, in this case, 2. Okay, dominated solutions are deleted. We make randomly modified copies of the surviving non-dominated solutions. And as we saw last time, by continuing this process, you get this Pareto. So we have our surviving non-dominated solutions that produce offspring, and by repeating this process of deleting the dominated solution and make randomly modified copies of the non-dominated solutions, you get this Pareto front that is moving up and to the right. Basic intuition. Okay, few other problems we have to solve, which is how do you know how transferable a controller is before you transfer it to reality? Here's a big hint down here. What you're looking at is some actual data from the Transferability project where they're approximating simulation to reality disparity. So we can measure transferability as minimizing the disparity between how the robot behaves in simulation and how it behaves in reality. So they're going to approximate it or estimate it before they send it to reality. How might you go about estimating the transferability of a controller before sending it to reality? Feels like a bit of a chicken and egg problem. Any ideas?
Add noise to different aspects of the simulation, like forces, maybe how the motors are actually functioning, potentially even like the robot's body itself in some way?
Okay, so going back to the very first attempt to cross the reality gap back in the early 90s, which was add noise to the simulation. If it's robust to noise, if it's robust to slightly different simulators with slightly different noise or slight differences, perhaps it would transfer well to reality. Great idea. That's not what they did in this project, but worthwhile of consideration. Okay, we'll see how they did it in a moment. Let's have a look at some real data, again, just to get a sense for how this multi-objective optimization process works. So their vertical axis here, again, is maximizing the behavior we want. So covered distance in simulation in meters. So we're trying to maximize this objective, and now we're trying to minimize this second objective on the horizontal axis here. Minimize the disparity between, or the predicted or approximated disparity between simulation to reality. Let's have a look at the X's for a moment. These were all the controllers they had in the population at generation I. Some of these X's were deleted, the ones that were dominated. The non-dominated solutions survived. They produced some offspring of their own. And at the next generation, at generation I plus 1, they're showing you the dominated and non-dominated solutions. So now, since we're trying to maximize along the vertical axis and minimize along the horizontal axis, we're trying to push the Pareto front up and to the left. So points up here is what we want. Points that cause the simulated robot to travel a long distance and are predicted to transfer well to reality. Okay. I'm going to show you this data, and now what you're looking at are actually the exact same controllers on this plot. The only thing that's changed from this plot to this plot is now they're plotting on the horizontal axis exact simulation to reality disparity. They took all of these controllers and sent them to the physical robot, which you haven't seen yet. And you can see that some of these points have moved around. Generally speaking, these points here along the Pareto front more or less show up here. They're more or less in the same place, generally speaking, which means however they approximated or predicted the disparity of these controllers, or however they approximated the transferability of these controllers, they did indeed transfer about that well. So what you're going to see in a moment, the reason why this method became so popular is they have an efficient way to predict how transferable controllers are. Okay. So let's see how to actually do that. Let's start running this algorithm. And we're going to start by creating a whole bunch of random controllers, and we're going to evaluate each of those controllers on a simulated robot, which you haven't seen yet. And we're going to measure how far each of these controllers causes the simulated robot to move to the right. So we're going to know the height of all of these points. We know how well they get the simulated robot to do whatever we want them to do. But we have no idea about the transferability of these controllers. So we're going to collapse them all into a vertical line here. We're going to assume transferability is 0 or undefined. So which of all of these points that are now lying on this vertical line, which one are you going to send to reality first? We can't estimate transferability yet. We haven't sent anything to reality. Which one do you send?
The highest in objective 2.
Okay, so we have an optimist. Let's send the controller that causes the robot, the simulated robot, to move as far as possible. Maybe we get lucky. Who knows? Okay, hopefully you've come far enough in this class to be a realist. Here's the first one. This is the one that you saw at the top of that line there, which does indeed cause this legged robot to move to the right. How do we do? I see some shaking of heads. We fell through the reality gap, right? Don't underestimate the gap. It's there. Okay, so we now have two numbers for this controller. We know how well it causes the simulated robot to do what we want, and we know it didn't transfer well at all. Let's just pause for a moment. Assuming you have the opportunity to send a second controller from this population to the physical robot, which one do you send next? Is our optimist still an optimist? Should we send this one?
I'd go like the middle.
Ah, the middle, right? We've learned our lesson. Now, why do we jump to the middle? Because there's an unspoken assumption at the moment, which is controllers that are at similar height are probably going to have similar transferability. That's the intuition that the investigators are going to run with. If you sent something and it didn't transfer well, it fell in the gap, don't send another controller that's similar to that controller. These two controllers have similar heights. Maybe one is a parent and one is a child, or one is the grandchild of the other one. Question?
Are we only sending a limited amount of robots?
We're always sending a limited number of controllers to the real robot because it takes time and effort to execute the controller. If we could send thousands or millions of controllers to the real robot, we don't need a simulator. We might as well just do evolution directly on the physical machine.
Okay, so
Yep.
you won't be sending all of those though.
We want to choose carefully which ones we send. We want to send, the game we're playing here is we want to send a minimum of controllers to the physical robot, and as soon as we can, we want to converge on a controller that gets the physical robot to do what we want. We want to find controllers that are up here and to the right, that are efficacious, meaning they get the robot to do what we want, and they transfer well.
How will we know when they're done? Like sending.
How will we know when we're done? We never know, because we can never be sure we found the optimal controller. Remember that biological evolution and artificial evolution, including multi-objective optimization, is a satisficer, not an optimizer. It's a good question. We never know that we found the most efficacious and the most transferable controller. We're just going to try with a handful of transferals to get as far up and to the right as we can. Is there a question over here?
Yeah. Do we, in simulation, like
Yep.
dilate the time so that we can like simulate a lot more things quicker?
We-
Like do we speed up physics in the simulations so that you can do many more generations?
Can we speed up the simulator? We can run 1,000 simulators on the supercomputer out in Colchester on 1,000 GPUs. Assume you have an infinite budget in simulation, or at least you always have a much larger budget of simulators than real trials. The currency here, the limiting factor, is how many controllers you can run on the real robot. You can run or evolve these controllers for as long as you want in simulation, as many simulations as you want at as fast or slow speed as you want. But we need something that works not just in simulation, in reality. Everybody get the game we're playing here? Okay, so the idea was maybe we send a middle controller next. Why not this one down here? Why not just go to the opposite end of the spectrum? Why not send this one?
This is so bad already.
It's so bad already. So this one gets the robot to maybe stay still. Guess what the transferability of that controller is? It's fantastic, right? It's going to be down and to the right. We could send it just to make sure, almost as a sanity check, but it's not really worthwhile sending this one. Sending things up here is dangerous. We're likely to fall through the gap. So why don't we go to middle ground here? And maybe this one is also terrible. Maybe it doesn't transfer very well. Or maybe this one is kind of okay. Maybe it gets average transferability, mediocre transferability. Maybe the real robot travels at half the speed that the simulated robot does when both the simulated and real robot are running this controller. Let's assume that is the case. You found this controller that gets the robot to travel at the real robot to travel at half the speed. Where do you go next? It's not really that obvious. It's kind of tricky. Let's see what the investigators did. Okay. They are going to estimate the transferability of every controller in the population. As you're going to see in a moment, they're going to take all of these points, which most of these points are controllers that have not yet been sent to reality, and they're going to move them horizontally. They're going to estimate transferability. And you can imagine they're going to get something like a Pareto front, and they're going to try and send a controller to reality, which is as transferable and efficacious as possible. Where on this front, which point on this front is highest and to the right? The one that gets the simulated robot to do what we want and is predicted to cross the gap. Okay. Hopefully, you're already thinking, okay, great, but how do we estimate transferability? We're going to do it generally based on the intuition that we can estimate the transferability of controller I by setting that transferability close to the transferability of controller J, where controller J is a controller that produces similar behavior on the simulated robot. And that controller J has already been sent to reality. We know the transferability of controller J. We're going to use that to estimate the transferability of controller I, the controller we haven't sent to reality yet. Everybody see the intuition before we go into the math? Okay. All right. So here we go. How do we measure similarity between behaviors? We're going to start by defining a distance measure between any two behaviors. Not a distance measure between the controllers themselves. We've got a set of synaptic weights for controller I, a set of synaptic weights for controller J. We're not taking the Euclidean distance between these sets of synaptic weights. We're going to take the distance between the behaviors produced by controllers I and J. How do you measure the similarity between two behaviors? Remember our Department of Silly Walks, right? Ministry of Silly Walks. How do you measure the distance between two silly walks?
Like the difference in motor commands?
Okay, we could. So we could take the motor commands sent to the robot, to the simulated robot when it's running controller I and controller J. Would give us, it would give us, let's say, 8 numbers if there's 8 motors. And then if we ran the simulation for 1,000 time steps, we have an 8 times 1,000 matrix, which are all the motor values sent or generated by controller I, and another 8,000 values for the motor values generated by controller J, and take the Euclidean distance between those 8 sets of 8,000 numbers.
Like footfall pattern.
Okay, so the motor commands is a good idea, but it's very, very high dimensional. It's hard to actually measure distance well in very high dimensional spaces. We're not going to go into why, just for our purposes, assume that's the case. So like Fitz was saying, maybe we can go with something that's lower dimension, maybe footfalls, some feature of the behavior. It's not footfalls, but that's what the investigators did, is they defined a vector that's made up of 3 numbers, 3 floating point numbers, which are 3 different features of how the simulated robot moves when armed with a given controller, F1, F2, and F3. They chose these features kind of arbitrarily. The first one, which is probably the most important one, is how far did the robot travel? Which is ultimately the thing we're interested in. That's F1. F2 is the mean height of the robot during travel. So it's giving us kind of an estimate, an approximation of how it moves. Not the 1,000 heights of the robot during each time step of the simulation. They're taking the mean height. Just they're collapsing it to one number. So, and then finally, the final orientation of the robot. I know these investigators, they saw our Resilient Machines project from 2006, in which the robot starts forward and walks in a circle and ends up pointing backwards. So the final orientation of the robot was the 3rd feature that they chose. So imagine we have a population of controllers, like usual, like you have in your assignment code base now. They take that controller, run it on the simulated robot, generate a whole bunch of raw data in the simulation, and boil all of that raw data down to 3 numbers, F1, F2, and F3. The distance then between the behavior produced by C1, controller C1, and controller C2 is the Euclidean distance between these two behavioral vectors. B1 is the set of 3 numbers produced by C1. B2 is the set of 3 behavioral features generated by C2 running on the simulated robot. That's it. So we have 2 different controllers. We run them on a robot. Or let's assume we have 2 different controllers, 2 different sets of synaptic weights. We run each one on the simulated robot, and the distance between them, the behavioral distance caused by those 2 controllers, is 0. Can that happen? What would that mean?
Just means that the 2 vectors are the same, and if we're just looking at features and not the overall like matrix, it's gonna end up possible that you have multiple things with the same vectors.
It could be that those 2 controllers actually did produce 2 different behaviors, but when we boiled it down to these 3 vectors, they're almost identical or completely identical. Or maybe these 2 different controllers both cause the robot to not move. There's different sets of synaptic weights that can cause a robot to not move, and they both get the same behavioral vector. Okay, so now we have a way of measuring the behavioral distance between 2 controllers. We're going to use this behavioral distance to define the transferability of controller I, which is take controller I and get the behavioral features produced when you run controller I in simulation. Then take controller I, send it to the real robot, have the real robot be controlled by controller I, compute the behavioral features from reality, and you got another set of 3 numbers. You take the distance between those 3, and in this case, they just took the negative of the difference between those 2 vectors and defined that as transferability. Why take the negative of? Why invert this number?
That way you can maximize that number as opposed to minimize it.
The higher this number is always going to be negative now, but the higher it is, the more transferable that controller, CI, is. So far, so good? Okay. All right. Last piece. Now we can put all this together. We have our population of controllers, and from time to time, we send a controller to reality. We get our behavioral features back, and we know the real transferability of that controller. For the rest of the controllers that we haven't sent to reality yet, we have to try and estimate their transferability. And we're going to estimate it by looking at how close that controller is to the other controllers that have been sent to reality. And we're going to set the estimated transferability of that controller, which for our purposes on this slide is going to be CI. We're going to estimate the transferability of CI based on how close or how far it is from the other controllers we've sent to reality, which are going to be in the set CT. Controllers that are, sorry, I misspoke. We're going to try and estimate the transferability of controller C. We're going to see how close or how far controller C is from the other controllers that have been sent to reality. And those controllers that have been sent to reality are sitting inside the set CT, the set of already transferred controllers. Controllers that have already been sent to reality that are closer to C are going to influence our estimate of the transferability of controller C more than controllers that have been sent to reality that are further away from C. If we have if we have a controller C and we're trying to estimate transferability for it, and there's another controller in the population that's already been sent to the robot that's identical to C, you can bet that the transferability of C is going to be equal to the transferability of CI, this controller that we've already sent to reality. That's the same as C. Everybody get the idea here? Okay. So we're going to sum over all of the controllers that are in the set CT. We're going to take the exact transferability of C sub I. So C sub I is a controller that's been sent to reality. We're going to take that transferability and we're going to divide it by the behavioral distance between C and CI. We're going to sum all those up. Forget about this term for a moment. We're taking a weighted sum here. We're summing up all of these transferabilities, and we're dividing by CI's distance from C, the one that we're trying to estimate. Why? Why divide by the behavioral distance? As we're drawing CIs out of the bag CT, if there is a CI that's very close to C, and remember that close means produces similar behavior on the simulated robot, what happens to that particular term? Yep.
It gets larger.
It gets larger, right? It's having more of an influence on the estimate. So we're taking a weighted sum, and then we're multiplying by this term here. We're going to sum up over all the behavioral distances. What is this term doing? Usually when you see a weighted sum, it's usually W times something plus W times something plus W times something. The weight is usually multiplying by this term. In this case, we're doing the opposite. We're dividing by. So usually when you see a weighted sum, it's, W1 times something plus W2 times something. And then you usually do something to that weighted sum when you're finished with the summation.
Usually you divide by the area, but this is multiplying.
You divide by because? What's the final division? Once you take a weighted sum and then divide it by something,
The average.
to compute the average of those things, right? This is a weighted sum. When we multiply this by this term, it becomes a weighted average. We're ending up with basically the average of all of the actual transferability values for all the CIs in CT. But that weighted average, some of the transferabilities contribute more to that weighted average than others, which are the ones that are closer to C. Okay, let's just do a cartoon example of this. I'm controller C, and we're trying to estimate the transferability for me. Let's say there's 3 other controllers that have been sent to reality already, and one of those 3 controllers very similar to me. That controller that's very close to me was very transferable. The other 2 controllers, which are very different from me, they had terrible transferability. What do you think my transferability is estimated to be? I'm estimated to be pretty transferable. Okay, so imagine now, again, we've sent some controllers to reality. For all the rest of the controllers in the population, we can now estimate their transferability. So we have estimates for everybody else who hasn't been sent. After all that work, now we can send a new controller to reality. Which one do we send?
The one that's estimated to be the best in both.
Now we can be an optimist, right? We've done our best to carefully estimate how transferable things are. So let's give ourselves a break. We'll just send the one that is estimated to be most transferable. Yeah? Okay. We can send one to reality, and then we can run our move for as long as we want. We can keep running the simulation because we can now estimate all of the controllers in the population, right? They don't have to sit on this vertical line anymore. We can keep evolving controllers to produce better and better behavior in simulation and to produce higher and higher estimated transferability values. So imagine we have this evolutionary algorithm running on the supercomputer out in Colchester, and it's just going, and the real robot is here on the desk, and the real robot puts up its hand and says, I'm ready to run a new controller. We go to the supercomputer, we grab a point off the Pareto front, a controller that is efficacious in simulation and is estimated to have high transferability, send it to the real robot. And as the real robot starts to be controlled by that controller, we just keep running the evolutionary algorithm. The real robot takes 30 seconds or a minute to run that controller. We get back those 3 behavioral features. The real robot puts up its arm again and says, I'm ready for another controller. We take the next controller from the population, send it on the real robot, and we have 2 loops now that are running continuously. The real robot is continuously executing controllers, and Moo is continuously finding new controllers for the real robot to run. Every time the real robot sends back a new triplet of behavioral features, we add that controller, we add that controller to the set CT, and Moo is now able to estimate the transferability of controllers better because it has more controllers with which to base its estimate. Everybody see now how the transferability project runs? Okay, so the video I showed you before, where was it? This one, which did not transfer, this was one of the original random controllers. There was no good way to estimate how good a controller transferred, and it transferred terribly. At the end of this process, they ran this experiment for a few days. The bottom pair of videos that you're about to see, this was the last controller in the population. Many projects in this course so far, I've said at the end of evolution, they played the most fit controller on the real robot. There is no most fit controller anymore, right? Remember, there is just a set of controllers that are more or less efficacious and more or less transferable. So at the end of the experiment, they took a controller from somewhere in the middle of the Pareto front, up and to the right as far as they could get. Here's what it looked like in the bottom left. Here's what it looked like in simulation. And in the bottom right, here's how that controller did. How do we do? How'd they do? After all that effort, they took a controller that they had never sent to reality before. It did well in simulation, check. And it was predicted to transfer well, and it did well, check. All right, one last thing that's interesting about the transferability project. Have a look at the 2 videos on the left. What's the difference? Why is one transferable and one not? Why did the lower one transfer so well and the upper one transferred so terribly?
Seems like the lower one, the oscillation of the legs are lining up better between legs that are in line.
Maybe. I've seen this video hundreds of times. I don't know. The investigators don't know. Do you know?
No, it kind of looked like it was like swinging its mass back and forth. Like
Maybe, right? Just a reminder, the gap is wide. It's difficult to cross. It's hard to say why some things manage to cross the gap and some don't. For those of you that had to shovel this winter and you're still wishing you had a snow shoveling robot, this is part of the reason. In simulation, assuming we can simulate snow well, which is also tricky, we can evolve something that looks great in a physics engine, but getting it to work in reality automatically, very difficult. This is why this is still an open problem.
This project seems like it works pretty well. Using this method, or does it run into issues in other use cases? I assume it probably does, but like where would it run into issues?
Absolutely. So it's a good, we wouldn't be talking about it if it wasn't a good solution, but it's not perfect. No one's come up with a perfect solution to crossing the gap yet. What do you think the issues are with scaling this up to a more complex machine? So we try this with an autonomous vehicle that's got dozens or hundreds of motors, depending on how you count. What's the problem?
Probably like the cost, money, but just like time and resources to actually run it in reality, to keep giving it data to more accurately predict off of.
Maybe we show these videos to Elon and convince him to let us run this on hundreds or thousands of his Teslas. Maybe that's the limitation. For the big companies, not really. They got a lot of autonomous vehicles.
Is it the moo gets too hard to optimize if you've got too many parameters?
So one of the problems is, in reality, it's not just BOO, it's not bi-objective optimization, it's moo, many objective optimization. So if we're talking about autonomous vehicles, evolve controllers for an autonomous vehicles that transfers well from the simulation of the vehicle to the real vehicle, make the vehicle go fast, and don't kill anyone along the way, and don't suddenly accelerate and don't suddenly decelerate, and pay attention to all road signs, and make sure that you travel at half the speed if it's snowing or it's icy, and. There are more and more objectives. And we talked about the curse of dimensionality last time. Many objective optimization quickly runs out of gas when you try and run it at high dimensions with lots of objectives, which you need for real vehicles that are heavy and could kill someone if they don't do the right thing. Yep. Also, it's difficult to create a realistic simulation of an autonomous vehicle in a city, in a rural environment, in snow, in sleet, in mud, in fog. Tricky.
Has anyone tried, we talked about meta-evolutionary algorithms, maybe evolving an evolutionary algorithm that is evolving a neural network that could do this prediction, maybe that could produce better predictions?
That is definitely an area of active research, which is, we used kind of a very silly, simple equation here to estimate transferability. We could use a neural network and try and train it to be a better estimator. Absolutely, people are working on that problem. Works sometimes, doesn't work others, right? The black box neural network says, I estimate this controller will transfer to reality. It didn't kill anyone in simulation, and I'm pretty sure it won't kill anyone in reality. I'm a black box. I can't tell you why I think that, but I think that.
I guess sort of a related question. If you have any intuition about both, like why 3 points in that vector and why those points in particular?
Yes. Why 3? Arbitrary choice. Why those particular 3? Another arbitrary choice. The idea here was to try and choose features that are kind of orthogonal. They capture different things about how the robot moves, but again, it's kind of arbitrary. There are ways you could do this in a more principled way, and folks are working on that also, which helps, but again, I wouldn't trust it yet. Okay. All right. You all get the spirit, which is, I'm glad you're asking all these questions. It's an unsolved problem. Okay. All right. That concludes our discussion about the reality gap. We're going to move on now and tackle this question of scalability. We would like to be able to manufacture very large numbers of autonomous machines, and we could do it in the way that we produce all other kinds of machines, like iPhones and automobiles and drones, but maybe we can do something smarter, which is make machines that make machines. What could possibly go wrong, right? Okay, let's talk about self-replicating robots. So, traditional manufacturing, or most manufacturing today, if you want to manufacture large numbers of things, like automobiles, you build this thing called a factory. That thing is a thing that makes the thing that you want. Wouldn't it be nice if you could create a factory that creates factories that creates factories, where either those factories also do what you want, or at the end, those factories produce the ultimate thing that you want, which is the automobile. People have been thinking about this idea of self-replication for a long time. The first formalization of this idea of self-replication goes back to John von Neumann in the 1940s. We're going to look at different kinds of self-replicating machines today. I'm hesitant to take my pen because I'm going to break my projector here. Okay, there we go. All right, so the first type of self-replication that we're looking at today is theoretical self-replication. So in theory, John von Neumann described theoretically a machine which became known as the universal constructor. That machine had three parts. The first part was a blueprint of itself. The second part was this machine has a mechanism that can read the blueprint and make a copy of whatever the machine is described inside the blueprint. And the blueprint describes this machine and this mechanism. And then finally, inside this bigger machine is a smaller machine, a copy machine that can make copies of the blueprint. If you put these three things together, the blueprint, the mechanism, and the blueprint copier, you end up with you end up with a machine that constructs a machine specified by the blueprint. The copy machine creates a copy of that blueprint, and finally it puts that blueprint into the new machine. The moment it does that, you have a new machine that has the blueprint, the mechanism, and the blueprint copier. So what does that new machine do? It does exactly what the original machine does, and now you have self-replication. This busy picture up here was the theoretical construct that was able to do all of these three things. In the years that followed, people figured out how to simplify this machine in theory so that it could still make copies of itself. This idea of a machine that has a blueprint inside itself, and that part of this machine has the ability to copy the blueprint into the new machine, that should sound kind of familiar. What is that? What is this idea? Where have you heard this before? A genome that's made up of genes, which are made up of DNA. When was DNA discovered? Okay, for the history buffs here, who came up with the idea first? Was it von Neumann in machines, or Watson and Crick in Cambridge? I'll leave that as an optional exercise for you. Okay, that's theoretical self-replication. Let's jump forward. Let's jump forward from the 40s into the 50s, specifically 1959. There's a very interesting article that appeared in Scientific American magazine in that year, which is mechanical self-replication. This was the surprising demonstration that you don't need genes. So by 1959, people knew about genes and DNA. You didn't need to do it in theory. You could do it without all this complex machinery. Dumb, inert material could do it as well. In this article, which is assigned reading for today, there's a bunch of cartoons that are showing actual things you can build. All these are wooden blocks. I want you to think about these two wooden blocks sitting inside a wooden sleeve here, and we're going to shake this wooden sleeve back and forth. We're going to introduce some energy to the system, specifically kinetic energy, energy through movement. And that energy is going to be quote unquote captured by these little wooden blocks, and the wooden blocks are going to quote unquote turn that energy or use it for self-replication. I'm putting quotes around capture the energy, use it for self-replication, because of course there's no intelligence here. There's nothing that's actually recognizing and capturing the energy and figuring out how to turn it into self-replication. This is just wood. The system requires one other thing to get going, aside from the energy and the shape of these blocks, which is a seed. So the human investigator goes in and puts two of these wooden blocks together in just this way, and now I want you to think about shaking this block back and forth. What's going to happen? All of these pieces are going to start jiggling around inside this wooden sleeve as you shake this wooden sleeve left and right. What's going to happen? They'll stack on each other. Imagine our seed here bumps into this piece. The underside of this piece is going to push the upper part of this seed down, causing this piece to tilt. And then its little hook is going to attach to that little hook. And now we have a piece that's made up of three pieces. We have the seed has grown. If we keep going, it's probably going to capture this piece, and eventually this piece, and this piece, and we're going to have them all together in one interconnected piece. This is not quite self-replication, but it's a step towards it. The authors, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, refer to this as crystalline growth. We have this physical system, it's not biological, that just starts to grow. And the pattern inside this growing thing is the same. It's regular, very much like a crystal. Yeah? Okay. In the paper, they go through a series of more and more complex illustrations of more complicated wooden blocks, which eventually don't just grow, but also self-replicate. But rather than looking at the images, let's watch the actual video from the 50s. Here we go. Oh, sorry.
In this film, the experiments shown in this film set out to solve the problem first clearly stated by the mathematician von Neumann. Can a machine be constructed which can automatically make another exactly like itself? If a machine could act like the living cell you see here, so long as the parts needed for making more machines were available, it would go on reproducing itself, and so also would its progeny. Perhaps the demonstration you're going to see may throw light on the process of cell division or gene replication. A practical attempt to solve the problem has recently been made in a series of experiments by L and R Penrose. They began by making a kind of crystal that was formed in response to seeding or priming by a small part of itself. Each of these models, like those that follow, is simply made out of plywood. The pieces here are all alike, each has 4 hooks. Energy is supplied by horizontal agitation in a confined space. But as you see there, the units don't link up. A linked pair is added, and the result now is that all the pieces join together in response to the agitation. Again, in the neutral state, the units don't link up. If the seed has a different form, you'll see it's tipped to the left this time. Then the crystal faithfully copies the new pattern. crystal's more like a living organism if it's made aperiodic, by having only 2 hooks on each unit. There are 2 kinds of unit here, and they're arranged randomly, and as before, they don't link up unless they're primed. A live group is made of 2 linked units, and this is added to the others. The principle is no life except from life. Agitation causes the formation of a new live group wherever it's possible. A new group's appeared there on the right of the picture. The other one is the original seed. Now, if the seed is tilted in the opposite direction, again, it's faithfully copied, just as a mutant gene is copied. A more stable live group can be made from laminated units.
Okay, we're going to jump ahead from crystal growth to self-replication.
And the units can be hooked together at the side. We start with 2 of these units joined together, and a 3rd one is accepted, and when a 4th one is added, then the whole thing divides in the middle. You'll see that food can be accepted at either end, and again the thing splits. These particular units can be joined side by side to form a complex. That seed has 8 levers. Now 2 more units have been added, then another one making a 7th. But it's not until the last unit is in place that there is a release and the whole thing divides in the middle. And so we get reproduction of this rather complicated machine. Perhaps you'd like to be convinced that mechanical reproduction, as it's been shown here, can be really automatic. These units are a little more complicated. As before, they won't join up when they are in the neutral condition. The live complex will have 4 possible programs controlled by the arrangement of the levers. And whatever program is chosen for the seed will determine the pattern of the other units. Here you see the live seed put in, and through agitation you get joining up. This process takes a fairly long time, but it's eventually complete. And then you get splitting in the middle as before, a process resembling mitotic cell division.
Okay. Not bad for 1959. A great demonstration of automatic self-replication. Still mechanical, so why would we want to create such machines? Maybe we can learn something about how biology does self-replication, which was something that was very new at the time. If we want to create very large numbers of robots that do useful things for humans, we're going to move on now to, I'm going to skip over this slide. We're going to move on now to robotic self-replication. In robotic self-replication, we're going to use this idea of mechanical self-replication as sort of the starting point. But we're going to add in some electronics and make our machines a little bit more complicated so that these machines can do useful work as a side effect of self-replication. So we're ultimately in robotic self-replication looking to create machines that do useful things safely on behalf of humans, and additionally, under the right conditions, they can make copies of themselves. Yeah? Okay. Here was, there's many examples of this kind of work in the literature. Here's an example of a self-replicating robot. You can see it's inspired by the Penrose tiles that you just saw. few details about this experiment. You'll notice there are some plates built into the wooden floor. These wooden plates supply electricity, and they also have some electromagnets in them. Why electromagnets?
The ability to connect and disconnect as you desire.
Absolutely. So there's controlled attachment and detachment here. Each of the six, or most of the six sides of these cubes, as you see, they also have power ports and electromagnets. So there is a controller that is flowing up from the floor that is sending commands through the electromagnets and some electronic connections. So the minute an unpowered dumb block comes into contact with the ground, it becomes a robot. It suddenly has a sense, think, act cycle. It's able to sense its neighbors. There's a little bit of a controller inside, which we'll talk about in a moment. What's the action? Sense, think, act. What's the action here? What can these cubes do?
It's connecting and disconnecting to form new structures.
So these cubes can turn on and off the electromagnets in their faces. That's one set of actions they can perform. What else?
Each one can also rotate individually.
Absolutely. So each of these cubes is cut along its grand diagonal, and there is a rotational motor, not unlike the motorized hinge joints you've been creating in the assignments, that rotates one half of the cube relative to the other half. I helped work on this project, and we spent a lot of time writing the controller that would get all this to work. It's a little finicky. What else is required to get this robot to make a copy of itself?
You need kind of copies already made so they can be moved around.
You need, the robot needs food. The human slaves have to make more of these cubes and put them in exactly the right three-dimensional position at exactly the right time for this process to continue. If we don't feed this machine very carefully in the right way, self-replication halts.
Is this being run by just like a more traditional controller, or is there a neural network controlling this?
There is not a neural network controlling this. There's a more traditional controller, which is a set of if-then-else statements, and we'll see some in a moment. Okay. This robot, like Penrose's tiles that you just saw, only self-replicates. It doesn't do anything else. There's no useful side effect of this machine yet. It was just to see whether we could do this in reality first. So whether or not this is an advance on what had been done in 1959, I leave it up to you to think about. Question?
Has this been like expanded to being adapted to a neural network to try to say achieve something? Like you got a couple different, and it's stack as high as we can. Or move to a point.
Good question. I don't know if anyone has built on this trying to replace the if-then-else with neural network controllers to get this to be more sophisticated.
Why would you want a self-replicating robot that can both self-replicate and do a task instead of having two separate robots, one that creates another robot that does stuff?
A great question. So the short answer to your question is it's an economic term actually, which is exponential utility. So utility is this fancy word in economics for useful stuff for humans, right? So we have one snow shoveling robot that shovels my driveway. It's utile for me. It's doing something useful for me. But if it can make a copy of itself, now me and my neighbor don't have to shovel our driveway anymore. And if those two can each produce a copy of themselves, now it becomes exponential. There's an exponentially growing number of folks in Jericho and Underhill and Cambridge that no longer have to shovel their driveway. That's exponential utility. Your question is, can we separate these two tasks? So we have one machine that self-replicates and builds things that only shovel. Great question. Do we actually need to conflate or bring together self-replication and useful behavior in the same machine? Unknown. Maybe it would be simpler to divide and conquer. However you do this, ultimately what those who are working in robotic self-replication are trying to do is achieve an economic goal. Create a machine or sets of growing machines that show exponential utility. This machine definitely does not provide exponential utility. I spent a few hours sitting next to this machine, carefully putting the block in exactly where it was supposed to be at the right time. It was tiring. It was ridiculously boring. There were humans that were involved in the loop. This thing didn't become exponentially more useful over time. May be good for now while we figure out the kinks of how self-replication works, but ultimately that's kind of where we're headed. Or that's what we're trying to achieve. Other questions about this particular robot? Yes?
Is it made from some organic material? It kind of looks like.
It looks like it. It's this white, semi-transparent plastic. Hint, hint.
Is it 3D printed?
Part of it was 3D printed. So again, this was the lab at Cornell that had one of the first 3D printers. We used it to help build these blocks, but there was a lot of human engineering that went into putting the magnets in, the wires inside, the motors inside. It's a pretty complicated, arguably one of the more complicated robots we're going to see in this course. Definitely not automated, a lot of human in the loop, but if you squint, it looks like self-replication. Okay, a lot of human effort went into this, including designing the controller to get this to work in the first place. Not easy to do. So the next experiment we're going to see is dedicated to the same machine, but now not in reality. We're going to go back to simulation. You're probably thinking we're going to evolve controllers for this simulated robot, where the fitness function is now not locomotion, we could evolve populations of controllers for this robot to get it to do what? To do a better and better job at self-replication, yeah? How do you quantify how well or how poorly a machine or an organism or a set of wooden blocks is at self-replication? What's the metric? It's not that hard.
I feel like it would be kind of like a curriculated, or a learning curriculum where you kind of stepwise have it pick up blocks and build from there.
Great observation. So we probably borrow an idea from machine learning known as curriculum learning, or as we've seen it in this course, scaffolding. We could set the fitness function to be make as many copies of yourself as possible. Oh, and by the way, for all of those copies, make sure that those copies can make copies of themselves, right? The depth of your family tree could be the fitness function, but even producing one copy of yourself, even if that copy is non-functional, it doesn't work, is very difficult. So maybe we say, get some of the parts in the right place, build up towards making a copy of yourself. If you manage to make a complete copy of yourself, you get an extra fitness point. Then if you make a grandchild, you get another extra fitness point. We could do that. We could build up an evolutionary algorithm where we evolve replicative ability. I love the experiment you're about to see because they don't do that. What did they do instead? They started, as I mentioned, by simulating the real machine you just saw. The other simplification that they made is they flattened this into a two-dimensional machine. So instead of cubes, we're now going to work with squares. Each square, each element of this machine has four sides, A, B, C, and D. And you'll notice again that there is a motor in the center that can swivel the upper right triangle relative to the lower left triangle. So in this simulated machine, let's imagine we have this 6 element simulated 2D machine. And this particular square rotates about this diagonal. In this case, the upper 2.5 squares are going to rotate out of the plane and then back into the plane again. Everybody see that? They are not going to simulate this swiveling out of the plane and back into the plane. They're going to just have a 2D simulator where at time step 0, the machine looks like this. If this motor receives a non-zero command, at the next time step, the machine is going to be drawn in this way. So we're making a number of simplifications. We're going to drop a whole bunch of cubes onto an empty two-dimensional environment. Each non-black pixel here represents a cube, and the color represents the average of controller of the average color of the controller's plural of that cube. Each individual cube, as you're going to see in a moment, has 3 separate controllers running inside it. 3 separate if-then-else pieces of code. Okay. They're going to be different. So in this first time step of this simulation, all of these controllers, each one of these non-black pixels has 3 random controllers dropped into it. Every single cube is unrelated to every other cube. Each one has a random brain running inside. Feels kind of familiar, feels like an evolutionary algorithm. As you're going to see, it's going to become not very familiar in a moment. So far, so good? Okay. What do these 3 controllers look like? Each controller is not actually, well, I guess it is an if-then-else statement, but we're going to represent it as a binary tree of depth 4. Here's depth 1, depth 2, depth 3, and I didn't draw depth 4 here. As we start at the top of this tree and move down through this tree, as we visit each of the 4 levels, that level is going to tell us whether or not to turn magnet A on or off. Remember that we're dealing with squares. Each square has 4 sides. Each of these 4 sides has an electromagnet attached to it. And these magnets can be on or off. So when we finish descending through this tree of height 4, we're going to switch the 4 electromagnets on or off inside that cube. Imagine we're looking inside this cube at its controller. What happens at the top of this tree, we randomly choose the letter A, B, C, or D and drop it into that node. We're creating a random controller. We roll a 4-sided die, and in this case, it came up B. We put a B in here. We need 2 nodes underneath. We attach 2 nodes underneath. We roll our 4-sided die again, comes up A, roll again, D, and so on. So we've got a binary tree of depth 4, and we're labeling the nodes randomly as we go. You'll notice that inside the node it says B question mark. The question mark is, does this particular square, which is running this controller, does this square have a neighbor on its B side? Here's its B side. This controller does not have a neighbor on its B side, so we follow the right-hand edge and turn off the A magnet. As we move down through these trees, if we go down and to the left, we're going to turn the magnet on. If we go down and to the right, we're going to turn the magnet off. That's set. That never changes. It's kind of an odd controller. We've never seen controllers like this before. Now we get down here. Here we're asking, does this particular square have a D neighbor? We look at the D edge. Yes, there is a neighbor on the D side. So in this case, we follow the yes edge and we turn the B magnet off. We follow left or right. As we go down, we're switching the electromagnet on or off. Sorry, one last detail I forgot to mention. When we make this random tree, we're randomly putting A, B, C, and D into the nodes. And for the 2 branches, we assign yes or no, or no and yes. Flip heads, yes, no. tails, no yes. So we're labeling the tree randomly, and then as we descend that random tree, depending on the state of the square, depending on its neighbors, it's going to flick the electromagnets on or off. So far, so good? Seems like a bunch of arbitrary choices. Bear with me. The second tree, the second controller sitting inside this square, same thing. We're going to make a tree of depth 4. We're going to label randomly each of the nodes with A, B, C, or D. And for each of the edges, for each pair of edges, we're going to flip a coin, yes, no, or no, yes. But now, when we descend through this tree, we've just descended down this tree, flicked the electromagnets on or off. Now we're going to descend down this tree and we're going to rotate this square, or not. Top level of this tree, we're going to determine whether to swivel AB. What does that mean? Here's AB. So swiveling AB would be AB rotates relative to CD. CD stays where it is and AB turns. Swivel CD means that AB stays still and CD rotates. You'll notice in this cartoon here, there is something connected to CD, this whole thing. These 5 cubes will rotate along with the rotation of CD if this magnet is on. If this electromagnet is off, then CD rotates and leaves these 5 pieces behind. As we get down into the third level of this tree, we're going to try and rotate we're going to swivel AC, which is up and down here. This is undefined because they're not on the diagonal. You'll notice some of these cubes, A and C, are next to one another. Depending on how the cubes rotate, sometimes A and C are next to one another, sometimes they're not. If this controller tries to swivel AC and AC are not next to one another, the rotation fails. Okay, a lot of kind of arbitrary details here. Descend through this tree, turn on and off the electromagnets. Descend through this tree, the cube tries to rotate or not. The third and final tree, exact same thing. A tree of depth 4, label the nodes randomly, label the edges randomly, and then as you descend through the tree, take these 3 controllers and attempt to overwrite the 3 controllers in your neighbor. So for example, if we descend along this edge here, this cube will try and overwrite these 3 controllers into the neighbor on its A side. This particular cube has no neighbor on its A side, so the attempted takeover doesn't happen. It copied the controllers and sent them out into empty space. Nothing happened. As we get down into the level 3 of this tree, it's going to attempt to overwrite controller into neighbor C. In this case, it does have a neighbor C, so it takes its 3 controllers, makes copies of those 3 controllers, and overwrites the 3 controllers in this square. This hostile takeover is successful. Okay, so we've just walked through the 3 controllers that live inside of this square. There's another 3 random controllers, different random controllers in here, in here, in here, and in here. We'll continue the discussion of this experiment on Thursday. You have a quiz due tonight. You're finishing up A9 or D4. See you on Thursday. Thanks.